Welcome back to Sarah's Werewolf Romance collection, where the alphas are possessive and the omegas are never for sale. Quick question for the pack before we dive into today's chaos. How many strikes do you give a man before he's out? Let me know your relationship rules in the comments, and drop a pug emoji if your own pet is currently rolling around and judging your audiobook choices. Today, we have a special one. It's funny, it's tense, and it involves a very broken door and a very desperate king. But before we start, if you want to support the collection and get early access to stories like this, hit that join button down below. It helps us keep the nursery blooming and the stories coming. Now, take a deep breath. The alpha is out of options, and the omega is done hiding. Let's read. Chapter 1. The scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine was usually enough to center Carly Johnson. But today, even her favorite sensory anchors were failing. She stood in the center of Mrs. Higgins' overgrown garden, wiping a smudge of loam from her cheek, trying to maintain a veneer of professional politeness. "I explicitly asked for perennials that scream majesty, Carly," Mrs. Higgins sniffed, adjusting her oversized sun hat. "These look pedestrians." Carly forced a smile, though her inner wolf, a scrappy little omega with zero patience for entitlement, bristled. "Hydrangeas are hardly pedestrian, Mrs. Higgins. Once they bloom in late July, they'll provide a cacophony of color. Trust the process." Carly's business, Greenhaven Designs, was her sanctuary. It was the one place where she didn't have to worry about pack politics or the fact that she was 26, unmated, and perpetually single. She had built this company from the ground up, fighting for every contract in Port Ballor. She didn't need a mate to validate her existence. She needed clients who paid their invoices on time. After soothing Mrs. Higgins' ego with promises of extra fertilizer, Carly marched to her car. It wasn't just any car. It was her pride and joy, a vintage emerald green Volkswagen Carmen Ghia. She had restored the interior herself, stitching the leather seats until her fingers bled. It wasn't a beat-up clunker. It was a statement. She slid into the driver's seat, the engine purring with a throaty rumble that sounded more like a contented cat than a machine. She drove back to the nursery, the city of Port Valor blurring past her window. When she arrived at her small apartment above the main greenhouse, she was greeted by the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of a tail hitting the floorboards. "Rollie, I'm home!" she called out. A beige blur shot out from under the sofa. Rollie, her pug, skidded to a halt on the hardwood, his tongue lolling out sideways. True to his name, he immediately dropped onto his back and began to wriggle and roll aggressively on the rug, snorting with delight. He was chubby, judgmental, and the only male she currently allowed in her life. "Rough day for you too, huh?" Carly sighed, stepping over his rolling form to toss her keys on the counter. She grabbed a bottle of sparkling water from the fridge, relishing the cold condensation against her palm. The silence of the apartment usually felt peaceful, but tonight it felt heavy, oppressive. She pushed the thought away. She was independent. She was successful. She was staring at a thick envelope sitting on her kitchen island. It was red. Official red. Frowning, Carly tore it open. Her hazel eyes scanned the document, and the blood drained from her face. It was a foreclosure notice from the bank. It claimed Greenhaven was in arrears, a logistical impossibility since she was meticulous with her finances. "This has to be a mistake," she whispered, her voice trembling. Rollie stopped rolling. He sat up, tilting his head, his large bug eyes wide with concern. He let out a soft, sympathetic woof. Carly gripped the counter, the paper crumping in her hand. This land was her legacy, her life. If she lost the nursery, She lost everything. The loneliness she usually kept at bay surged forward, not as a vague feeling, but as a sharp, visceral ache in her chest. She needed to fix this, and she needed to do it alone, just like always. Chapter 2. The next morning, Carly was on a warpath. Before she could storm the bank to demand answers about the foreclosure notice, she needed supplies for the Thompson job. Work didn't stop for personal crises. She stood in the aisle of Hammer and Nail, Port Valor's largest hardware depot, staring down a pallet of premium mulch. She needed 4 bags. Each bag weighed 50 pounds. "Okay, Johnson, you got this," she muttered. She squatted, gripping the first bag. She refused to grab a cart. She only needed a few, and her pride was still stinging from the bank letter. She heaved the bag up, grunting slightly. As she turned to swing it onto her shoulder, a shadow fell over her. A massive tower shadow that seemed to swallow the fluorescent lights of the aisle. "Allow me." The voice was deep, a subterranean rumble that vibrated in her sternum. Carly looked up, and kept looking up. The man standing there was colossal. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than her entire inventory, the fabric straining against shoulders that looked capable of carrying a boulder. His hair was dark and intentionally messy, and his eyes were a piercing, unnerving shade of ice blue. Without waiting for her permission, he reached out. His large hand closed over the plastic of the mulch bag she was holding. "I can handle it," Carly said, her voice tighter than she intended. "I insist," he rumbled. Their fingers brushed. Wham! It wasn't a spark. It was a jolt, sudden and violent, like a punch to the gut. The air in the aisle suddenly grew heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on Carly's arms stand up. Her inner wolf woke up from a nap and howled, slamming against her ribcage. "Mate." Carly gasped, stumbling back. The man froze. His ice-blue eyes widened, the pupils blowing wide until his irises were nearly black, midnight blue. He stared at her, his chest heaving as if he'd just run a marathon. He smelled intoxicating, like burnt cedar and sea salt, earthy and grounding, with a hint of dangerous storm. "You," he breathed, the word sounding like an accusation. Carly's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She knew who this was. Everyone in Port Valor knew the face of the Alpha King. Dexter Pembroke, the CEO of Pembroke Holdings, the Breaker. And he was staring at her like he wanted to devour her whole. Your lifting form," Carly stammered, her brain short-circuiting. "It's terrible. You're lifting with your back. You'll slip a disc." Dexter blinked. The intense predator gaze faltered, replaced by sheer confusion. "Excuse me?" "Bend your knees," she said, her voice gaining a little more traction. She pointed a trembling finger at his legs. "If you're going to be chivalrous and steal my mulch, at least don't injure yourself. I can't afford the liability lawsuit." Dexter looked down at his own legs, then back at her. A flush of red crept up his neck, clashing with his scary reputation. He looked shy? I will keep that in mind," he said, his voice stiff. He didn't move. He just stood there, clutching the bag of mulch like a lifeline, staring at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "I'm hiring you," he blurted out. Carly blinked. "What?" "I need a landscaper," Dexter said, the words rushing out fast, as if he were trying to catch them before they fell. "For my penthouse, the terrace. It's a disaster, complete ruin, dead plants everywhere." Carly narrowed her eyes. "The Alpha King has dead plants?" Yes, he lied. She could tell he was lying because his left eye twitched. I need you to come with me, now, to assess the damage. Chapter 3. Carly did not go with him now. She drove her Carmen Gia back to Greenhaven, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. She had just met her mate. Her mate was the Alpha King, and instead of sweeping her off her feet, he had tried to hire her like a contractor. She was pacing the floor of the main greenhouse, talking to a row of ficus trees, when the sound of a silent engine approaching made her pause. Through the glass walls, she saw a sleek, matte black Audi RS e-tron GT pull into her gravel driveway. It looked like a spaceship had landed amidst her potted petunias. Dexter Pembroke stepped out. He had ditched the suit jacket and his white dress shirt was rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms that were distractingly muscular. He looked out of place among the bags of fertilizer and garden gnomes, a panther stalking through a petting zoo. Carly walked out to meet him, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're persistent." "I'm efficient," Dexter corrected. He stopped 3 feet away from her. The scent of cedar and salt washed over her again, making her knees wobble. He seemed to be fighting the urge to step closer, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I assessed the square footage of my terrace," Dexter said, his tone clipped and businesslike. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a checkbook. "I am prepared to offer you a retainer for the project." He scribbled a number and tore the check out, holding it toward her. Carly took it, intending to politely decline. Then she looked at the number. Her eyes widened. The amount was obscene. It wasn't just generous. It was enough to buy a small island, or, more relevantly, pay off the bank arrears 3 times over. "This is ridiculous," Carly said, looking up at him. "This is an exorbitant amount for landscaping. What do you want me to plant? Gold bars?" "I want the best," Dexter said, his gaze dropping to her lips before snapping back up to her eyes. He looked pained, as if every moment he wasn't touching her was physically hurting him. "I don't haggle, Miss Johnson." "Carly," she corrected, "and I don't take charity." "It's not charity. It's a fee for priority service." Dexter took a step closer, invading her personal space. The heat radiating off him was incredible. "I need this done immediately, starting today." Carly's mind raced. Her pride told her to rip up the check. He was trying to buy her. But the red envelope on her kitchen counter burned in her memory. If she took this job, she could save Greenhaven. She could save her legacy. She squared her shoulders. "I can't start today. I have other clients." "Cancel them," Dexter growled softly. "No," Carly said firmly. "I honor my commitments. But," she took a breath, "I can fit you in starting tomorrow morning, and I'll take the job. But we are renegotiating this fee. It's too high. I'll charge you my standard rate plus a 20% rush fee. Nothing more." Dexter looked stunned. No one ever told him his money was too much. A flicker of respect lit up his midnight blue eyes. "Fine," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "Tomorrow." Chapter 4. The victory of securing the contract was short-lived. That evening, as Carly was feeding Rollie his dinner, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. "Ms. Johnson." It was Dexter. His voice sounded strained, tight with tension. "How did you get my number?" Carly asked, putting the dog bowl down. Rollie immediately shoved his face into the kibble, snorting loudly. "That doesn't matter," Dexter said. "There has been a development. My security team has picked up chatter about a mercenary cell, the Red Hounds, moving through the outskirts of Port Valor. They're operating near your sector. Carly frowned. I haven't heard anything. You wouldn't. They are stealthy, Dexter said quickly. Too quickly. It is not safe for you at the nursery. It's too isolated. The glass walls, they are a security nightmare. I have a security system, Carly argued, glancing at the keypad by the door. It's insufficient, Dexter snapped. I am not asking, Carly. As the alpha of this territory, I am invoking emergency protocols. You need to evacuate. Evacuate? To where? To the spire, Dexter said. My penthouse is a fortress. It has reinforced steel doors, biometric scanners, and 24-hour guards. You will stay here while you work on the terrace. It is the most logical solution. Carly narrowed her eyes at the phone. This feels convenient, Dexter. It is necessary, he insisted. Please, I cannot guarantee your safety otherwise. There was a crack in his voice, a genuine note of panic that made Carly pause. She didn't know him well, but she sensed that the Alpha King didn't panic easily. If he was this worried, maybe the threat was real, and her wolf was whining, urging her to be near him. Fine, she sighed, but I'm bringing Rollie. The dog? Dexter sounded hesitant. Yes, and he has a lot of accessories. If he can't come, I'm taking my chances with the rogues. Bring the dog, Dexter conceded immediately. An hour later, Carly was parking her emerald green Carmen Ghia in the pristine subterranean garage of the spire. She grabbed her overnight bag and tucked Rollie under one arm. The pug was wearing his fancy red bow tie for the occasion. Dexter met her at the elevator. He looked relieved, his shoulders relaxing slightly as he saw her. He reached for her bag. I've got it, she said automatically. Carly, he warned, his voice low. He gently pried the bag from her fingers. Let me. They rode the elevator in silence to the penthouse floor. When the doors opened, Carly stepped into a space that was breathtakingly cold. The floors were polished marble, the furniture was sleek black leather, and the walls were floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the city lights. It was beautiful, but it felt like a museum, not a home. It's spacious, Carly said, her voice echoing. It's secure, Dexter corrected. The guest suite is down the hall, but... He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. There is a malfunction with the guest room HVAC. It's freezing in there. You'll have to take the master suite. Carly raised an eyebrow. And where will you sleep? The couch, Dexter said, pointing to the rigid, uncomfortable-looking leather sofa. Don't be ridiculous. I'll take the couch, Carly said. No, Dexter growled, the alpha tone slipping out. You take the safe room. The master suite has the panic button. You sleep there. He looked at her with such fierce intensity that Carly felt a blush rise to her cheeks. He was practically vibrating with the need to protect her. Fine, she whispered. She set Rollie down. The pug looked at the expansive marble floor, gave a happy snort, and immediately began to scoot his butt across the expensive stone. Dexter watched the dog with a look of pure horror. What is he doing? He's marking his territory, Carly smirked. Get used to it, Your Highness. We're moving in. Chapter 5. The first morning at the Spire was less like a romantic getaway and more like a tactical standoff between two alien species. Dexter Pembroke, Alpha King and CEO of a multinational conglomerate, was a creature of silence and rigid schedules. He rose at 4:30 a.m., drank black coffee, and read digital market reports in a living room that was usually as quiet as a tomb. Carly Johnson, however, was an agent of chaos. At 6 a.m., the door to the master suite creaked open. Carly emerged, wearing oversized flannel pajama pants and a t-shirt that read "Compost Happens." Trailing behind her was Rollie, whose toenails clicked against the polished Italian marble floors like a tap dancer wearing cleats. Click, 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 click. Dexter, who had been trying to sleep on the uncomfortable black leather sofa, cracked one ice blue eye open. He looked like a man who had gone 10 rounds with a bear and lost. "Good morning, sunshine," Carly chirped, heading straight for the kitchen. "Do you have a coffee grinder, or do you just chew the beans raw to maintain that alpha intensity?" Dexter sat up, a groan rumbling deep in his chest. His hair was a mess, sticking up in tufts that made him look deceptively approachable. "The machine is automatic. Do not touch the settings. It is calibrated to a precise temperature." "Boring," Carly muttered. She pressed a button. The machine whirred to life, hissing steam. Within 20 minutes, the pristine ecosystem of Dexter's penthouse had been disrupted. Carly had opened the floor-to-ceiling windows to let the stale air out, allowing the humid city breeze to mix with the sterilized air conditioning. She had also turned on a jazz playlist on her phone, filling the silence with the chaotic, upbeat sounds of a saxophone. Dexter sat at the kitchen island, gripping his mug as if he wanted to crush it. "Is the noise necessary?" "It's not noise, it's bebop," Carly corrected, rummaging through his fridge. "And yes, it is. Plants grow better with music. I assume the same applies to grumpy alphas. You have absolutely no food in here, Dexter. Just condiments and protein shakes. It's tragic." "I eat out, or order in," he grunted, watching her move. He was trying to be annoyed, but his wolf was traitorously wagging its tail. Having her in his space, smelling like wild honeysuckle and crisp apples, was soothing a jagged ache in his soul he hadn't realized was there. Then, disaster struck. Rollie, having explored the vast expanse of the living room, decided that the texture of the antique Persian rug, a hand-woven masterpiece Dexter had imported from overseas, was the perfect place to relieve himself. Carly gasped, "Rollie, no!" It was too late. The pug looked up at Dexter, maintained intense eye contact, and squatted. Dexter froze. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with doom. He slowly lowered his coffee mug. Did that dog just... "He's nervous!" Carly cried, rushing over with a roll of paper towels she had miraculously produced from her bag. "New environment! Stress bladder! It's a thing!" "That rug," Dexter said, his voice dangerously calm, "cost more than the GDP of a small nation." "It's wool," Carly said, scrubbing frantically. "Wool is resilient, unlike your ego, apparently." Dexter stood up. He towered over her, his shadow engulfing her small frame. He should have been furious. He should have kicked them both out. But as he looked down at the top of her messy bun and the frantic way she was trying to save his rug, the anger evaporated, replaced by a strange, ineffable warmth. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Stop scrubbing. You'll grind it in. I'll call the cleaners." Carly looked up, her hazel eyes wide and apologetic. "I really am sorry, Dexter. I can pay for the cleaning." "Don't be ridiculous," he muttered, turning away to hide the small smile tugging at his lips. "Just keep the beast off the furniture." Chapter 6. By evening, the atmosphere in the penthouse had shifted from domestic chaos to high-stakes tension. Dexter had returned from his office early, his mood foul. "I have a meeting tonight," he announced, loosening his tie as he strode into the living room. Carly was on the terrace, aggressively pruning a dead potted palm she had found in a corner. "Okay," she said, snipping a brown frond. "Do you want us to leave? Rollie and I can go for a walk." "No," Dexter said sharply. "The threat level is still elevated. You are to stay inside." He paused, adjusting his cufflinks. "Ideally, you will stay in the master suite. My associates, they are old-fashioned. They would not understand your presence here." Carly paused, her shears freezing in midair. "You want me to hide?" "I want to avoid complications," Dexter said, avoiding her gaze. "Whatever you need, dinner, entertainment, order it on the house account. Just stay out of sight." Carly didn't argue, which should have worried him. She just offered a tight, polite smile. "Understood. Enjoy your meeting." 2 hours later, 3 elderly werewolves sat in Dexter's living room. They were members of the regional council, stiff, conservative men in gray suits who smelled like dust and judgment. They were droning on about zoning laws and pack territory lines. Dexter was bored out of his mind. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his eyes glazing over as Councilman Thorne droned on about proper Omega decorum. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the master suite opened. Carly walked out. She wasn't wearing her gardening clothes. She was wearing a simple, elegant slip dress in a deep forest green that hugged her curves in all the right places. Her hair was down, cascading in soft waves over her shoulders. The conversation in the room died instantly. "Good evening," Carly said, her voice smooth and confident. She walked to the wet bar, completely ignoring Dexter's stunned expression. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I just needed a glass of water." "And who is this?" Councilman Thorne asked, eyeing her with a mixture of suspicion and appreciation. "Carly Johnson," she said, turning to face them with a dazzling smile. She didn't offer her hand, she just nodded regally. "I'm the landscape architect redesigning the terrace. Dexter felt it was crucial I stay on site to monitor the microclimate changes at night." It was complete nonsense, but she sold it with such conviction that the men blinked. "Landscape architecture?" another councilman asked. "A fascinating field. We were just discussing the land usage near the river." "The soil acidity there is terrible for development," Carly said effortlessly, leaning against the bar. "Unless you're planning to invest in heavy remediation, you're better off rezoning it for wetlands. It would actually lower your tax liability by 15% under the new environmental preservation statutes." The room went silent. Dexter stared at her. He knew she planted flowers. He didn't know she understood tax law and zoning codes. "She's right," Thorne muttered, looking at his colleagues. "We hadn't considered the tax break." For the next hour, Carly held court. She charmed the old wolves, cracking jokes that made them wheeze with laughter, while simultaneously offering insights that made Dexter's business restructuring look brilliant. She was witty, sharp, and utterly captivating. Dexter sat back in his leather chair, watching her. He wasn't annoyed anymore. He was entranced. And then he looked at Thorne, who was leaning a little too close to Carly, smiling a little too widely. A low, vibrating growl started in Dexter's chest. It was involuntary, a deep rumble of possessiveness that caused the liquid in his glass to ripple. "Mine." Carly glanced at him, hearing the sound. Her eyes flashed with triumph. She set her glass down. "Well, gentlemen, I'll leave you to it. I have a microclimate to monitor." She sashayed back to the bedroom, leaving a room full of stunned alphas and one very conflicted king in her wake. Chapter 7. The guests left at 10 p.m. The moment the elevator doors slid shut, the temperature in the penthouse dropped 20 degrees. Dexter turned on his heel, marching toward the master suite. The air around him crackled with pent-up energy, sexual frustration mixed with alpha dominance. Carly was sitting on the edge of the bed, wiping off her makeup. She looked up as he entered, her expression calm. "That was dangerous," Dexter said, his voice low and rough. "That was helpful," Carly corrected. "I saved you from a very boring conversation about drainage." "You disobeyed a direct order," Dexter snapped. He paced the room, his hands running through his hair. "I told you to stay hidden. Those men, if they knew you were my mate, the political fallout would be catastrophic. They see Omegas as liabilities, Carly. Fragile things to be protected, not business partners." Carly stood up. The wipe fell from her hand. "Is that what they think? Or is that what you think?" "I am trying to protect you!" Dexter roared, the volume making Rollie whimper from his dog bed in the corner. "You don't understand our world, Carly. You play with dirt. You run a little nursery. These men run cities. You are out of your depth." The silence that followed was deafening. The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp. "You run a little nursery." Carly's face went pale. The foreclosure notice, the red envelope she had hidden in her bag, burned in her mind. He didn't know about it, but the insult landed directly on her deepest insecurity, that she was failing, that she wasn't enough. Her hazel eyes turned to gold as her wolf surfaced, hurt and angry. But she didn't scream. She went icy still. "My little nursery is my life," she whispered. "And I am not your employee, Dexter. I am not your subject. And right now, I am certainly not your mate." She walked to the door of the master suite, the room he had insisted she take for safety. "Where are you going?" Dexter demanded, stepping forward. "Nowhere," she said. "I'm staying right here. You are leaving." She stepped back into the bedroom and slammed the heavy oak door in his face. Click. The sound of the lock sliding home was final. Dexter stood in the hallway, staring at the wood grain. He blinked. She had locked him out. In his own house. "Carly," he warned, his hand hovering over the handle. "Open this door." "Go away, Dexter." "I am the Alpha King," he shouted, his control fraying at the edges. "You do not lock doors against me." "I just did," she yelled back. "Go sleep on your expensive rug." Chapter 8. Something inside Dexter snapped. It wasn't just the disrespect. It was the separation. The bond, which had been humming between them for days, suddenly screamed in agony at the barrier. The lock wasn't just metal. It was a symbol. She was shutting him out. She was rejecting him. Panic, cold and visceral, flooded his veins. His logic brain shut down. His wolf brain took the wheel. She is leaving. She is hiding. Break it. "Open the door," Dexter growled, his voice dropping into a register that wasn't entirely human. His eyes bled from ice blue to a terrifying midnight black. "No!" Carly shouted from the other side. "Ask nicely." "I am done asking." Dexter didn't bother with the handle. He didn't bother with the key. He stepped back, lowered his shoulder, and launched himself forward. Crack. The sound was like a gunshot. The wood around the doorframe didn't just yield, it exploded. Splinters of expensive oak flew through the air like confetti. The heavy door was torn from its hinges, crashing inward onto the carpet with a deafening thud. Dust motes danced in the air. Dexter stood in the ruined doorway, chest heaving, his fists clenched. He looked like a monster from a nightmare, surrounded by debris, his eyes glowing in the dim light. Carly stood by the bed, clutching a pillow to her chest. Her eyes were wide, terrified. Rollie was barking frantically from under the bed. Dexter took a step into the room, kicking a piece of the doorframe aside. He loomed over her, his shadow stretching across the bed. "Nowhere to hide," he rasped, his voice raw. Carly flinched, bracing herself, but the blow never came. Dexter's legs gave out. He dropped to his knees in front of her, the movement sudden and jarring. He didn't grab her throat. He wrapped his massive arms around her waist, burying his face in her stomach. He was shaking. Violent, uncontrollable tremors racked his body. "Don't," he choked out into the fabric of her dress. "Don't lock me out. Don't leave." The terrifying Alpha King, the breaker, was trembling like a child. The aggression hadn't been anger. It had been sheer, unadulterated terror. He thought he had lost her. Carly stood frozen, her hands hovering over his messy, dark hair. The fear drained out of her, replaced by a sudden, overwhelming realization. He wasn't a tyrant. He was just broken and lonely, just like her. She slowly lowered her hands, fingers threading through his thick hair. She felt him sigh, a long, shuddering exhale that seemed to deflate his entire body. "I'm not leaving, Dexter," she whispered softly. "I'm just mad." "I can handle mad," he mumbled against her stomach, tightening his grip until it bordered on painful. "I can't handle gone." They stayed like that for a long time, surrounded by the wreckage of the door, the Alpha King kneeling in the debris, clinging to his Omega as if she were the only thing anchoring him to the earth. Chapter 9. Sunlight streamed into the master suite, illuminating a scene of absolute devastation. The heavy oak door lay in splinters on the plush carpet, a jagged testament to the previous night's events. The door frame was twisted, the metal hinges shorn off as if they were made of tin foil. Carly woke up with a stiff neck and a heavy weight draped over her waist. She blinked, disoriented, until the scent of burnt cedar and sea salt filled her nose. Dexter was asleep beside her. He was fully clothed, still wearing his dress shirt from the meeting, though it was now wrinkled and unbuttoned at the collar. One massive arm was thrown over her midsection, anchoring her to the mattress. He wasn't just holding her. He was clamping her down, as if he expected her to vanish if he let go. Carly lay still, staring at the ceiling. The events of the night before replayed in her mind like a fever dream. The argument, the lock, the visceral crash of the wood shattering, and then the Alpha King of Port Valor crumbling at her feet, terrified of being left alone. She shifted slightly. Dexter's arm tightened reflexively, a low, warning growl vibrating in his chest before he even woke up. "I'm not leaving, Dexter," she whispered, her voice raspy. "I just need to pee." Dexter's eyes flew open. For a second, they were midnight black, the wolf still close to the surface, before fading back to their usual ice blue. He blinked, looking at her, then at his arm across her waist. He retracted it quickly, sitting up and running a hand through his chaotic dark hair. "I apologize," he muttered, his voice thick with sleep. "I encroached." "You broke my door," Carly pointed out, sitting up and gesturing to the wreckage. Dexter looked at the destroyed entryway. He winced. "I will have it replaced, immediately. The contractor is on speed dial." "You terrified Rollie," she added. Dexter looked around. "Where is the beast?" As if summoned, a flat, wrinkled face poked out from under the bed. Rollie let out a tentative woof, eyeing Dexter with deep suspicion. "He thinks you're a vandal," Carly said, swinging her legs off the bed. She walked over to the debris, picking up a shard of oak the size of a dinner plate. "You know, normal people knock. They don't turn into a battering ram." Dexter stood up, smoothing his wrinkled shirt. The vulnerability from last night was gone, replaced by his usual stoic armor. But there was a crack in it now. He watched her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You locked me out," he said simply. "The bond, it does not tolerate barriers. When I couldn't reach you, my wolf assumed the worst. It assumed rejection." Carly paused, holding the wood. She looked at him, really looked at him. "I wasn't rejecting you, Dexter. I was setting a boundary. There's a difference." "Not to him," Dexter said, tapping his chest. "To him, a locked door is a threat." "But," he took a step toward her, stopping just short of touching her. "I should not have lost control. It was undignified and dangerous." "It was a little scary," Carly admitted, "but also informative." "Informative?" "I learned that the big, bad Alpha King is actually just a giant, insecure puppy who needs reassurance," she teased, a small smile playing on her lips. Dexter's jaw tightened, a flush creeping up his neck. "I am not a puppy." "Rollie is a puppy," she continued, pointing to the pug who was now sniffing the broken doorframe. "You are a very large, very dramatic wolf who owes me breakfast. And a new door. Preferably one with a lock I can actually use." Dexter exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Deal. But the lock remains negotiable." Chapter 10. By mid-afternoon, the penthouse was swarming with contractors. The noise of saws and hammers was deafening, making it impossible to work or think. Dexter, looking for an excuse to get Carly out of the construction zone and away from the handsome lead carpenter, suggested a drive. "Where are we going?" Carly asked as she buckled herself into the passenger seat of his matte black Audi RS e-tron GT. Rollie was in the back, strapped into a specialized doggy booster seat, looking regal. "You said you like jazz," Dexter said, merging onto the highway with the silent, lethal acceleration of an electric predator. "There is a place in the old district, the Blue Moon." Carly laughed. "The Blue Moon? Dexter, that's my Uncle Hermes' place." Dexter froze. The car didn't swerve, his reflexes were too good for that, but his grip on the leather steering wheel tightened until his knuckles turned white. "Hermes creates the best jazz atmosphere in the city. He is your uncle?" "Maternal," Carly confirmed. "He's a character. You'll love him, or hate him. Usually it's both." They arrived at the club 20 minutes later. It was a basement venue smelling of old mahogany, expensive whiskey, and history. Even in the afternoon, it was dimly lit, the air thick with the ephemeral notes of a saxophone practicing in the back. Uncle Hermes was behind the bar, polishing a glass. He was a striking man in his 60s, with silver hair slicked back and a tailored vintage suit that made him look like a movie star from the 1950s. A cane with a heavy silver wolf head handle leaned against the bar. "Carly girl!" Hermes boomed, his voice a rich baritone. He set the glass down and embraced her across the bar. "And you brought the rat." "Rollie is not a rat, Uncle Hermes." He's a majestic creature, Carly said, kissing his cheek. I brought a guest. Hermes' eyes shifted to Dexter. The warmth evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating assessment. The air in the room grew heavy as two alpha auras collided, one young and kingly, one old and battle-hardened. Dexter Pembroke, Hermes said, not offering his hand. The breaker. I haven't seen you since you were a pup. You have your father's chin. Hopefully you didn't inherit his taste in brandy. Hermes, Dexter nodded respectfully. He didn't puff out his chest. He recognized a veteran when he saw one. Your establishment comes highly recommended. By who? My debtors? Hermes chuckled dryly. He picked up his cane, tapping it rhythmically on the floor. Tap, tap, tap. So, you're the one staying at the Spire with my niece, and I hear rumors of a broken door. Carly's eyes widened. How do you know about the door? That happened 12 hours ago. I have ears everywhere, darling, Hermes winked. Then he turned his gaze back to Dexter, the playfulness vanishing. Listen closely, Your Majesty. I may be retired, my joints may creak, but this cane? He lifted the silver-headed stick. It conceals a blade, dipped in a concoction that would make your healing factor feel like a sloth on tranquilizers. If you hurt her, really hurt her, I will mount your head over the jukebox. Dexter didn't growl. He didn't flinch. He looked Hermes dead in the eye and bowed his head slightly. If I hurt her, you won't have to. I'll do it myself. Hermes stared at him for a long, agonizing second. Then he broke into a grin. Good answer. Now sit down. First round is on the house. But if the dog pees on my floor, I'm turning him into a pair of slippers. Chapter 11. This is ridiculous, Dexter stated. This, Carly corrected, is culture. They were standing in the middle of Neon Nights, a retro arcade in downtown Port Valor. It was a cacophony of electronic beeps, flashing lights, and the shouts of teenagers. Dexter, in his dark designer suit, looked like a vampire who had wandered into a Chuck E. Cheese. Rollie was on Dexter's back, specifically in a canine sports sack carrier that strapped the pug to Dexter's chest like a baby. Rollie looked thrilled, his tongue lolling out as he watched the lights. Dexter looked mortified, but he hadn't refused to wear it. We are here to relax, Carly said, handing him a plastic card loaded with credits. To bond. To do something that doesn't involve pack politics or property damage. Pick a game. Dexter scanned the room with tactical precision. That one, the mole simulation. Whack-a-mole? Okay, big guy, show me what you got. Dexter approached the machine. He gripped the padded mallet. The game started. It was a massacre. Dexter didn't just hit the moles, he obliterated them. His reflexes were supernatural. Whack, whack, whack. His arm was a blur. He wasn't playing a game. He was executing a military strike against the plastic rodents. The machine started smoking slightly. A crowd of teenagers gathered, whispering in awe. New high score, the machine beeped weakly. You're terrifying, Carly laughed, pulling him away before security intervened. Let's try something less violent. Air hockey. They stood on opposite sides of the table. The puck hovered on its cushion of air. Prepare to lose, Pembroke, Carly grinned, tucking a strand of honey-brown hair behind her ear. Dexter opened his mouth to trash talk, but the words died in his throat. He looked at her, really looked at her. Under the neon pink and blue lights, she was radiant. Her eyes were crinkled with laughter, her competitive spirit making her scent spike with adrenaline and joy. She looked alive, and she was his. He forgot to defend his goal. Clack. "Score!" Carly cheered. 1-0. Are you even trying? Dexter blinked. He hadn't moved. He was just staring at her, his mallet hovering uselessly over the table. The shy awkwardness that plagued him around her surged back. He felt his face heat up. The lighting is distracting," he lied. "Sure it is," she teased. She hit the puck again. Clack. 2-0. Come on, Alpha. Focus. But he couldn't. For the rest of the game, Dexter Pembroke, the most feared wolf on the coast, lost miserably to an Omega landscape architect because he was too busy memorizing the way her nose crinkled when she scored. Rollie, sensing his temporary guardian's defeat, let out a long, judgmental sigh from Dexter's chest carrier. Chapter 12. They returned to the spire late, carrying takeout boxes and smelling of static, hot electronics and popcorn. The contractor had left for the day, leaving a temporary plywood security panel bolted over the ruined frame while the new custom door was being fabricated. "I am starving," Carly announced, kicking off her shoes. "And that takeout is going to take too long to reheat. I'm making grilled cheese." "We have no groceries," Dexter reminded her, unstrapping Rollie and setting the pug free. Rollie immediately ran to the Persian rug, sniffed it, decided it was already claimed, and trotted to the kitchen. "I went shopping while you were on a conference call this morning," Carly said, opening the fridge. It was no longer a barren wasteland of protein shakes. It was stocked with cheese, butter, bread, and actual vegetables. Dexter leaned against the marble island, watching her move around his kitchen. It felt strange, foreign, but not bad. The cold, sterile penthouse felt warmer, lived in. "Can I assist?" Dexter asked, feeling useless. "Sure, you can slice the tomato," Carly said, sliding a cutting board toward him. Dexter picked up the knife. He held it like a weapon. He attacked the tomato with the same intensity he had used on the moles. "Whoa, easy!" Carly laughed, reaching out to cover his hand with hers. "It's a vegetable, Dexter, not an enemy combatant. Gentle. Let the knife do the work." Her hand was small and warm over his. Dexter froze. The proximity was intoxicating. He could feel the heat radiating off her, smell the wild honeysuckle perfume on her wrist. He turned his head. Her face was inches from his. Her hazel eyes were wide, looking up at him. The humor faded from her expression, replaced by something softer, something heavier. "Like this," she whispered, guiding his hand. Dexter didn't look at the tomato. He watched her lips. "Like this," he repeated, his voice a low rumble. The knife slipped. "Ouch!" Dexter hissed. Carly gasped, pulling away. "You cut yourself!" It was a tiny nick on his index finger. A drop of bright red blood welled up. For a werewolf, it would heal in minutes, but Carly reacted as if he had severed a limb. "Come here," she ordered, dragging him to the sink. She ran his finger under cold water, her brow furrowed in concentration. She grabbed a paper towel, drying it gently. "It is fine, Carly," Dexter said, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. "It's already clotting." "Hush," she said. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a Band-Aid. She wrapped it around his finger with tender precision. Then, without thinking, she lifted his hand and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to the bandage. "All better," she smiled. Dexter stopped breathing. The kiss sent a shockwave through his entire nervous system that was more potent than the bond's initial spark. It was domestic. It was caring. It was love. He stared at her, his ice blue eyes wide and vulnerable. He opened his mouth to say something, to tell her that she was everything, that he would burn the world down for her. But the moment was interrupted. Bzzzt! The oven timer went off. "Cheese is ready," Carly chirped, turning away to grab the spatula, oblivious to the fact that she had just brought the Alpha King to his knees without even touching him. Dexter stood by the sink, clutching his bandaged finger, and realized with terrifying clarity that he was completely and utterly doomed. Chapter 13. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the spire, illuminating the temporary plywood board that was currently serving as the door to the master suite. It was an ugly, splintery contrast to the sleek Italian marble, but to Dexter Pembroke, it was a reminder of his loss of control, and the woman who had forgiven him for it. In the kitchen, Carly was pouring kibble into a ceramic bowl while Rollie danced around her ankles, his nails clicking a frantic rhythm on the tile. Dexter adjusted his silk tie in the reflection of the microwave. He was dressed for war, or a board meeting, which was essentially the same thing. On his right index finger, the cartoonish beige Band-Aid Carly had applied the night before was still prominently displayed. "You know," Carly said, leaning against the counter with a smirk, "you can take that off. You healed 10 minutes after I put it on. You look ridiculous wearing a Band-Aid with a $3,000 suit." "It serves a purpose," Dexter lied smoothly, not looking at her. "It keeps the wound sterile." "It's a paper cut, Dexter, and it's gone." "I am keeping it," he stated with finality. He picked up his briefcase, paused, and then awkwardly leaned in to press a quick, stiff kiss to her forehead. "Do not leave the building. The threat level remains variable." "Aye, aye, Captain," she saluted, though her eyes were soft. Dexter left, the elevator whirring him down to the garage where his matte black Audi RS e-tron GT waited. He felt lighter than he had in years. However, across the street, nestled in the shadows of a parking structure, a dirty gray sedan sat idling. Inside were 3 men wearing heavy leather jackets, the air in the car thick with the smell of stale tobacco and aggression. "That's him," the driver grunted, watching the black Audi merge into traffic. "The king is on the move." "Forget him," the man in the passenger seat snapped. He was older, with a scar running through his eyebrow. He held a pair of high-powered binoculars trained on the garage entrance of the spire. "We can't touch him. He's too protected. We need leverage." "What kind of leverage?" "The kind that hurts," the scarred man muttered. He adjusted the focus on the lenses. "Intel said he moved someone in. A female." "A mistress?" "Maybe." The scarred man scanned the garage as the heavy security gate began to roll down slowly behind Dexter's car. Just before it hit the concrete, a glint of color caught his eye. Parked in the far corner of the Alpha's private bay, nestled next to the black Audi's empty spot, was a vintage vehicle. It was unmistakable. A pristine, emerald-green Volkswagen Karmann Ghia. The scarred man lowered the binoculars, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Well, well, that's a very specific car. Run the plates. Find out who owns that green toy. If she means enough for him to park her in the royal garage, she means enough for us to use." "The red hounds are going to enjoy this," the driver chuckled, shifting the sedan into gear. Unaware that her beloved car had just painted a target on her back, Carly was upstairs, currently explaining to Rollie why he couldn't eat the plywood door. Chapter 14. "Absolutely not," Carly said, crossing her arms. "It is non-negotiable," Dexter replied, holding up a garment bag. "The annual PAX Charity Gala is tonight. As the Alpha, I must attend. As my Guest, you must attend. I don't do galas, Dexter. I do dirt. I do mulch. I do not do hors d'oeuvres that are smaller than a quarter. Please, Dexter said. It was the first time he had used that word without sounding like he was choking on it. He looked genuinely stressed. The council is circling. If I show up alone after the rumors of a guest at the penthouse, they will assume I am weak or hiding something. I need you. Carly sighed, looking at his hopeful, terrified expression. Fine, but if anyone asks, I'm your landscape architect, and I'm leaving early if the food sucks. 2 hours later, Carly emerged from the master suite. She had transformed. Gone were the flannel pants and the messy bun. She was wearing a floor-length gown of liquid silver silk that clung to her curves like a second skin. Her honey-brown hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, exposing the delicate line of her neck. Dexter, waiting in the living room in a tuxedo that made his shoulders look impossibly broad, stopped breathing. He actually stopped. His heart skipped a beat, then hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. You look... He cleared his throat, his voice dropping to a subterranean rumble. Adequate. Carly laughed, smoothing the silk. You really need to work on your compliments, Your Highness. Adequate won't get you a second date. The gala was held in the ballroom of the Port Valor Grand Hotel. It was a sea of black ties, glittering jewels, and the overwhelming scent of expensive perfume and alpha pheromones. Dexter was on edge the moment they walked in. He kept a hand on the small of Carly's back, steering her through the crowd with possessive precision. Every time a male wolf looked at her, and they all looked at her, a low vibration started in Dexter's chest. They were near the buffet when a waiter, a young beta with a charming smile, offered Carly a glass of champagne. For the lovely lady, the waiter winked, letting his gaze linger a second too long on her neckline. Grrr. The sound was low, but in the polite silence of the gala, it sounded like a chainsaw starting up. Dexter bared his teeth, his eyes flashing midnight blue. The waiter turned pale, the tray of glasses rattling in his hands. People turned to stare. The Alpha King was about to maul a catering staff member. "Dexter!" Carly hissed. She didn't shrink away. She stepped directly in front of him, blocking his view of the terrified waiter. She placed a hand flat on his heaving chest. Heel. The command was firm, authoritative, and completely unexpected. Dexter blinked, the red haze of jealousy clearing slightly. He looked down at her small hand on his tuxedo. He was looking, Dexter choked out. He is a waiter. He is doing his job. And I am your date, Carly said, her voice calm but steel hard. Stop growling at the help, or so help me God, I will go home and tell Rollie you kicked him. The absurdity of the threat and the fierce look in her hazel eyes snapped him out of it. The aggression drained away, replaced by sheepishness. I apologize, Dexter muttered, looking at the floor. Carly grabbed 2 glasses of champagne from the shaking waiter's tray. She handed one to Dexter. Drink and smile. You're making a scene. Dexter took the glass. He drank. He didn't smile, but he leaned down and whispered, You are terrifying. I know, she smirked, clinking her glass against his. Drink up, big guy. Chapter 15. The ride home in the Audi was silent, but it was a comfortable silence. The tension of the gala had faded, replaced by a quiet intimacy. When they arrived back at the Spire, Carly kicked off her high heels the moment the elevator doors opened, groaning in pleasure as her feet hit the cool marble. Civilization is overrated, she muttered, carrying her shoes. Dexter loosened his tie, unbuttoning the top collar of his shirt. He looked tired, the weight of the crown settling back on his shoulders. It is a performance, a necessary one. You need to unwind, Carly declared. She flopped onto the black leather sofa, the one Dexter had slept on for a week, and patted the cushion beside her. Sit, we're playing a game. Dexter hesitated, then sat down, keeping a respectful distance. What game? 20 questions, no lies, no deflecting, just truth. Dexter raised an eyebrow. Dangerous. I'll go first, Carly said, tucking her legs under her silver dress. Why do you live in a museum? This place, it has no soul, Dexter. No photos, no knickknacks, just expensive furniture and air. Dexter looked around the penthouse. My father believed that personal attachments were weaknesses. Clutter creates chaos. I suppose I never learned how to fill a space. He looked at her. My turn. Why do you have a 3-strike rule for clients? You mentioned it to the councilman. Carly's smile faded slightly. She twisted the silver ring on her thumb. My ex-fiancé. He was an alpha. Very charming, very rich. He slowly started eroding my boundaries. First it was, don't wear that. Then, don't work late. Then, sell the nursery. I let him get away with 100 little things because I thought it was love. When I finally left, I promised myself 3 strikes. Disrespect me 3 times and you're out. No exceptions. Dexter went still. His jaw tightened. He asked you to sell your nursery? He demanded it. He was a fool, Dexter said, his voice low and visceral. And if he ever comes near you again, the strike count will be 1, and it will be fatal. Carly looked at him, surprised by the intensity of his defense. He's in the past, Dexter. Your turn. Dexter looked at his hands, large, powerful hands that were currently resting on his knees. Why do you stay? The door is broken. I have growled at you. I have dragged you into danger. Why are you still here, Carly? It was the question that had been haunting him. Carly looked at him. She saw the fear behind the ice-blue eyes, the lonely boy who grew up in a cold house. Because, she whispered, reaching out to touch the Band-Aid on his finger. You broke a door because you missed me. You growled because you wanted to protect me. You're messy, Dexter, but you're real. And I think my wolf likes your wolf. Dexter stopped breathing. He turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. His palm was warm and rough against her skin. Just your wolf? He asked softly. Carly bit her lip, a flush rising on her cheeks. Ask me again later. That was question 4. Chapter 16. The next evening, the air was thick with the promise of rain. The humidity made the scents of the city heavier, amplifying the smell of damp concrete and blooming jasmine. Carly was on the terrace. For the past 3 days, she had been working tirelessly, transforming the barren slate of gray stone into a budding oasis. She had brought up massive planters filled with ferns, installed a trellis with climbing ivy, and arranged seating that actually encouraged conversation. Dexter stepped out through the glass doors. He had discarded his suit jacket, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He stopped, looking around. It is different, he said. It's alive, Carly corrected, wiping dirt from her hands onto her jeans. It just needed some soft edges. Nature doesn't like straight lines. Dexter. He walked over to where she stood by the railing, overlooking the glittering skyline of Port Valor. The wind whipped his dark hair around his face. "You have a talent," he said, standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. "You see things that aren't there and make them real." "That's the job," she shrugged, feeling suddenly shy. The proximity was overwhelming. The scent of burnt cedar was everywhere, wrapping around her like a blanket. "No," Dexter said. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone, rough and tender. "It is you." Carly's breath hitched. She looked up at him. His eyes were darkening, the pupils blowing wide until the blue was swallowed by black. He wasn't looking at the garden. He was looking at her mouth. "Carly," he breathed, her name sounding like a prayer on his lips. "Dexter," she whispered back. He didn't rush. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, when she rose up on her tiptoes to meet him, he closed the gap. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was an explosion. It was days of pent-up frustration, fear, and longing colliding in a single moment. Dexter groaned, a low sound in his throat, and wrapped his other arm around her waist, pulling her flush against him. His mouth was hot, demanding, tasting of coffee and desire. Carly's hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. The world fell away. There was no foreclosure, no red hounds, no counsel. Just him, just them. The chemistry was palpable, an electric current that sizzled between their skin. Dexter pulled back slightly, just an inch, his forehead resting against hers. He was panting. "I have wanted to do that since the hardware store." "Shut up and do it again," Carly commanded softly. He began to lean in, his lips brushing hers. "Woof! Woof! Woof!" A frantic, high-pitched barking erupted from the other side of the terrace. Dexter froze. Carly froze. They turned to see Rollie standing by a planter, barking furiously at a pigeon that had dared to land on the railing. The pug was bouncing on his front paws, defending the territory with the ferocity of a marshmallow. Dexter closed his eyes, letting out a long, defeated sigh. "I am going to buy that dog a very expensive, very soundproof kennel." Carly burst out laughing, the sound ringing out over the city. She grabbed Dexter's hand, lacing their fingers together. "Come on, Alpha. Let's save the pug from the bird." Dexter looked at her laughing face, then at the annoying dog, and realized he wouldn't trade this chaos for anything in the world. Chapter 17. The morning after the kiss on the terrace, the air in the spire felt different. It was charged, electric, and heavy with unspoken promises. Dexter had left for the office early, but he had left a note on the kitchen counter next to the coffee machine. "I will be home by 6. We need to talk. About us." Carly smiled, tracing the sharp, angular handwriting with her thumb. She felt giddy, a sensation she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. To burn off the nervous energy, she decided to water the plants in Dexter's home office, a room she usually avoided because it smelled too much like serious business and leather. She hummed a jazz tune as she misted the ficus in the corner. As she turned to leave, her hip bumped against the edge of Dexter's massive mahogany desk. A stack of files slid sideways, fanning out across the polished surface. Carly sighed, reaching down to tidy the mess. "Smooth move, Johnson," she muttered. She gathered the papers, intending to just stack them back up. Then, a bold header caught her eye. "Confidential. Acquisition target. Greenhaven Nursery." Carly froze. The water mister slipped from her fingers and hit the carpet with a dull thud. Her heart began to hammer a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She picked up the file, her hands trembling. Inside were detailed schematics of her land. There were bank documents, copies of the very foreclosure notice she had hidden in her bag. And stapled to the front was a memo from Dexter's chief financial officer. Debt purchase approved. Title transfer pending upon owner's default. Pembroke Holdings will assume full control of the asset, effective immediately. The world tilted on its axis. The foreclosure, the security threat, the move to the penthouse, it all clicked into a horrifying picture. Dexter wasn't protecting her. He was acquiring her. He knew about her debt, and instead of telling her, he had bought it behind her back to own her land. It was exactly what her ex-fiancé had done. It was the erosion of her agency, the removal of her choice. Strike 3. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow, a visceral punch to the gut that left her gasping for air. The kiss on the terrace suddenly felt like a lie, a distraction to keep her docile while he signed the papers to take her life's work. "I am not a transaction," she whispered, her voice cracking. She didn't wait. She couldn't. The fight-or-flight instinct that had kept her independent for so long screamed, "Run!" She marched to the master suite, stepping over the threshold with a plywood board still leaned against the broken frame. She threw her clothes into her bag. She grabbed Rollie, who was sleeping on the expensive Persian rug. "We're leaving, buddy," she said, her voice shaking. She grabbed a piece of paper and a Sharpie. She wrote 5 words, slashing the ink across the page with angry force. She slammed the damning acquisition file down on the kitchen island, placing her note directly on top of it. "I am not for sale." Chapter 18. Rain had begun to fall by the time Carly sped out of the garage, the sky turning a bruised purple that matched the ache in her chest. She pushed the emerald green Carmen Ghia harder than she ever had, the vintage engine roaring in protest as she merged onto the highway leading out of Port Valor. She didn't know where she was going. Uncle Hermie's place? A motel? Anywhere that wasn't owned by Dexter Pembroke. Tears blurred her vision, hot and stinging. "Stupid," she scolded herself, wiping them away furiously. "Stupid, stupid Omega. You let him in. You let him see you." Rollie whined from the passenger seat, sensing her distress. He pawed at her arm, his little face wrinkled with concern. "I'm okay, Rollie," she lied. "We're okay." She checked her rearview mirror to merge lanes. That was when she saw it. A gray sedan was riding her bumper. It was too close. Aggressively close. Carly frowned, tapping her brakes to signal them to back off. The sedan didn't slow down. Instead, it surged forward. Bam! The impact jolted the small sports car, snapping Carly's head back against the headrest. Rollie barked, sliding off the seat. "Hey!" Carly shouted, gripping the steering wheel. The sedan pulled up alongside her. The window rolled down, revealing a man with a jagged scar through his eyebrow. He grinned, a cruel, predatory expression that sent ice water through her veins. He swerved the heavy sedan directly into her lane. Carly screamed, jerking the wheel to the right. The Carmen Ghia spun. Tires screeched against the wet asphalt, a deafening shriek of burning rubber. The world became a kaleidoscope of gray sky and wet pavement. The car slammed into the metal guardrail with a sickening crunch. Metal crumpled. Glass shattered. The airbag deployed with the force of a cannon, punching the air out of her lungs. Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of steam from the radiator and the terrifying sound of heavy boots crunching on gravel. Carly gasped, coughing as the white dust from the airbag filled the small cabin. Her head was spinning. She looked over. Rollie was cowering in the footwell, shaking but seemingly unharmed. "Stay down," she rasped. She tried to open her door. It was jammed. A face appeared in her broken window. The scarred man. "Well, look at that," he sneered, the scent of stale tobacco and rot wafting into the car. "The king's little pet wrecked her toy." He reached in, grabbing a handful of her hair. Chapter 19. "Let her go!" The roar didn't sound human. It sounded like the earth itself splitting open. The scarred man froze, looking toward the highway. A matte black Audi RS e-tron GT screeched to a halt 50 yards away, drifting sideways to block the road. The driver's door flew open, but Dexter didn't step out. He launched himself out. Mid-air, his body contorted, bones cracked and reshaped with a wet, terrifying sound. His clothes shredded, falling away like confetti. By the time his paws hit the asphalt, he was no longer a man. He was a monster. A massive, midnight black wolf, easily the size of a pony, with eyes that burned like blue fire. He didn't pause. He charged. The 3 men from the sedan scrambled, pulling jagged silver knives and tire irons from their coats. "It's the king! Kill him!" Dexter hit the first man, the driver, with the force of a freight train. There was a sickening snap, and the man went flying over the guardrail, disappearing into the ravine below. The scarred man and the third attacker hesitated. They were alphas, but Dexter was a primal. He turned on them, a low, vibrating growl tearing from his throat that shook the rain from the air. But he was outnumbered. Another car, a black SUV, pulled up behind the sedan. 4 more red hounds poured out. They circled the black wolf, their weapons glinting in the headlights. Dexter snapped his jaws, keeping himself between the attackers and Carly's wrecked car. He was bleeding from a slice on his flank, the dark fur matted with crimson. Then a horn blared, a cheerful melodic Dixie horn. A vintage cream-colored convertible drifted around the corner, ignoring the wet road conditions. It skidded to a halt next to the Audi. Uncle Hermes stepped out. He was wearing a pristine beige trench coat and holding his silver-headed cane. He looked at the 7 armed men surrounding Dexter. "Boys have terrible manners," Hermes tutted. One of the new attackers rushed him. "Get the old man!" Hermes didn't flinch. He flicked his wrist. The silver head of the cane detached, revealing a gleaming, long blade. With a speed that belied his age, he parried the attacker's knife and struck him in the knee with the heavy wood shaft. Crack! The man screamed and went down. "I'm too old for cardio," Hermes sighed. He dropped the cane. His body shuddered, gray fur sprouting rapidly. Within seconds, a battle-scarred, grizzled gray wolf stood next to the black wolf. He was smaller than Dexter, but he moved with the efficient, dirty grace of a veteran killer. The 2 wolves stood back to back, a wall of fur and teeth protecting the green car. Chapter 20. Inside the car, Carly was fighting to stay conscious. Her forehead was bleeding, the blood dripping into her eye. She saw Dexter take a knife to the shoulder to protect her. She saw Hermes limping slightly on his back leg. They were fighting for her. "No," she whispered. The helplessness burned. It tasted like bile. She looked at Rollie, who was shivering against her leg. "Stay, Rollie." She kicked the jammed door. Once. Twice. The metal groaned. With a scream of frustration, she put her back into it and shoved. The door popped open, spilling her onto the wet asphalt. The smell of blood, Dexter's blood, hit her nose. It was acrid and terrifying. A red hound had circled behind the wolves. He was creeping toward Dexter's exposed flank, raising a heavy crowbar. Dexter was busy tearing the bumper off the sedan to use as a shield and didn't see him. "Dexter!" Carly screamed. The warning wasn't enough. The man swung. Something inside Carly snapped. The fear vanished, incinerated by a white-hot rage. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She ran. And as she ran, she shifted. It was painful, a searing heat that reshaped her bones, but she welcomed it. She burst through her clothes, landing on 4 paws. She wasn't massive like Dexter. She was sleek, fast, and covered in fur the color of golden honey. She was an omega. But an omega protecting her mate is a force of nature. She hit the man with the crowbar just as he began his downswing. She didn't go for his throat. She wasn't a killer. She went for his balance. She clamped her jaws around his ankle and yanked. The man shrieked, toppling backward. The crowbar clattered uselessly to the ground. Dexter whipped his massive head around. He saw the golden wolf standing over the fallen attacker, her lips pulled back in a snarl, her hazel gold eyes blazing. He let out a sound that was half roar, half whimper. Mate. The distraction cost him a second, but it gave Hermes an opening. The gray wolf lunged, finishing the fight with a decisive snap. Silence fell over the highway, heavy and wet. The red hounds were scattered, unconscious, fled, or worse. Dexter limped toward Carly. He was huge, terrifying, and dripping with rain and blood. He lowered his massive head, nudging her wet, golden fur with his snout. He whined, a high, desperate sound. "Are you hurt?" Carly's wolf leaned into him, licking the blood from his muzzle. "I'm here. I'm safe." Hermes sat down on the wet asphalt, panting heavily, and looked at the two of them. He let out a short, grumpy bark. "Get a room." Then, the adrenaline crashed. Carly's vision blurred. The golden wolf swayed and collapsed against the black wolf's side, the world fading to black. Chapter 21. The rain had turned the highway into a slick, shimmering mirror reflecting the flashing lights of the cleanup crew's black SUVs. The red hounds were gone, dragged away by Dexter's security team who had arrived minutes after the fight ended. On the wet asphalt, the transformation back to human form was agonizing. It wasn't a magical puff of smoke. It was the sickening crack of bones realigning and skin stretching. Dexter lay on his back, gasping for air, the rain washing away the blood on his shoulder. He was naked, shivering, and bleeding, but his eyes were locked on the golden wolf collapsed a few feet away. "Carly," he rasped, forcing his body to move. Beside him, the golden wolf shuddered. The honey-colored fur retracted, leaving a small, pale human form curled in the fetal position on the cold road. She was unconscious, a nasty gash on her forehead sluggishly weeping blood mixed with rain. Dexter crawled to her. He didn't care about his dignity. He didn't care about the security team approaching with blankets. He pulled her limp body against his chest, shielding her from the downpour. "Medic!" he roared, the sound tearing at his throat. Uncle Hermes, who had shifted back and was currently wrapping a foil emergency blanket around his waist like a sarong, limped over. He looked old and tired, his silver hair plastered to his skull. "She's alive, Dexter," Hermes said, his voice grave. "Head injury, probably a concussion from the crash. The shift forced her body to prioritize adrenaline over healing. She's crashed." A medic team rushed forward, loading Carly onto a stretcher. Dexter refused to let go of her hand, walking beside the gurney despite his own limp. "Wait!" Hermes barked, stopping the procession. He pointed his cane, which he had retrieved from a puddle, toward the crumpled wreckage of the emerald-green Carmen Ghia. From inside the twisted metal, a high-pitched, terrified whining echoed. "The rat," Hermes muttered. Dexter stopped. He looked at the car, then at Carly's unconscious face. He knew that if she woke up and that dog was missing, she would never forgive him. "Get the dog," Dexter ordered his head of security. "And be careful. If you scratch him, you're fired." A burly guard, looking thoroughly confused, pried open the passenger door. Rollie shot out like a cannonball, shivering and wet. He bypassed the guard and scrambled straight toward Dexter, leaping up to claw at his naked legs. Dexter scooped the pug up with his good arm. Rollie didn't bite him. Instead, the dog buried his flat face into Dexter's neck, whimpering softly. "I know," Dexter whispered to the dog, his voice breaking. "I know." They rode in the back of the private medical transport together, the Alpha King wrapped in a blanket, bleeding from a knife wound, clutching a pug, and staring at the woman who had fought a war for him. They bypassed the hospital. Dexter insisted on the Spire. He had the best private healers on payroll, and he wasn't risking her safety in a public ward. Back at the penthouse, the chaos was controlled. Healers worked on Carly in the master suite. Dexter was stitched up in the hallway, refusing anesthesia because he needed to stay alert. Hermes sat on the expensive leather sofa, drinking Dexter's best scotch straight from the bottle. "You have a lot of explaining to do." "Boy," Hermes grunted, eyeing the Alpha. "Starting with why she thought you were the enemy." Chapter 22. Carly woke to the smell of antiseptic and lavender. Her head throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache, but the sharp agony was gone. She blinked, realizing she was back in the master suite of the Spire. The plywood door was gone, replaced by nothing. Just an open frame. She tried to sit up. "Easy, Tiger," a familiar voice rasped. Uncle Hermes was sitting in a chair by the bed, reading a gardening magazine. He looked clean, dressed in one of Dexter's silk robes that was 2 sizes too big for him. "Hermes," Carly croaked. "Rollie?" "The rat is fine. He's currently sleeping on a pillow that costs more than my car," Hermes said, gesturing to the foot of the bed where Rollie was snoring. Memory flooded back. The file, the note, the crash, the wolves. Carly stiffened. "Dexter, the file. He bought the debt. He tried to own me." Hermes sighed, closing the magazine. "Is that what you think? You stubborn, foolish girl." "I saw the papers, Hermes. Acquisition target. He's just like Marcus. He wanted to control the nursery." "He bought the debt to forgive it, you idiot," Hermes said bluntly. Carly froze. "What?" Hermes stood up, leaning on his cane. "The bank was going to auction your land to a developer on Monday. Dexter found out. He couldn't just pay it off because he knew your pride wouldn't let you take the money. So, he bought the debt portfolio from the bank so he could legally mark it as paid in full without you knowing until it was done. He was trying to save your legacy, not steal it." The air left the room. The silence was absolute, heavy with the weight of her mistake. He was saving me?" Carly whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "He took a knife to the shoulder for you," Hermes pointed out. "I think his intentions are clear." Hermes patted her hand, stood up, and walked out. "I'm going to make coffee. Fix this." Moments later, Dexter appeared in the doorway. He was shirtless, a thick bandage wrapping his left shoulder and chest. He looked wrecked, eyes rimmed with red, stubble darkening his jaw. He hovered in the hall, afraid to enter. "Carly," he said, his voice rough. You idiot, she sobbed, holding out her arms. Dexter crossed the room in 2 strides. He collapsed onto the edge of the bed, burying his face in her neck. He smelled of soap and copper and burnt cedar. I thought I lost you, he murmured against her skin. I saw the car. The crash. Hermes told me, Carly cried, running her hands over his bare, warm back. About the nursery. I'm so sorry. I know. I should have told you. Dexter pulled back, framing her face with his large hands. His midnight blue eyes were intense, searching hers. I don't want to own you, Carly. I just want to make sure you're safe enough to bloom. The confession hung in the air, ineffable and perfect. Carly didn't speak. She pulled him down. The kiss was different this time. It wasn't an explosion, it was a surrender. It was a slow, agonizingly sweet slide into oblivion. Dexter was careful, mindful of her injuries, treating her like she was made of spun glass. But Carly wasn't having it. She needed to feel him. She needed to know he was real. She tugged him closer, her hands exploring the hard muscles of his chest, the bandage on his shoulder, the heavy beat of his heart. Love me, she whispered against his lips. Right now. Dexter growled low in his throat, a sound of pure worship. He shifted, covering her body with his, careful not to put his full weight on her. The friction was electric, skin on skin, heat on heat. When they finally joined, it was a slow, deep rhythm that felt like coming home. There was no rush, only the visceral connection of 2 souls finally locking into place. Dexter watched her face the entire time, his expression open and vulnerable, as if he were memorizing every breath she took. It was passionate. It was intoxicating. And for the first time in her life, Carly didn't feel like she was losing herself. She felt like she was being found. Chapter 23. Sunlight hit Carly's face, waking her up. She stretched, her body aching in a way that was entirely pleasant. She reached out for Dexter, but the other side of the bed was empty. Panic flared for a split second before she heard it, the sizzling of batter and the sound of jazz. She grabbed one of Dexter's crisp white dress shirts from a hanger and pulled it on. It hung to her knees. She padded barefoot out to the kitchen. The scene that greeted her was domestic chaos. Dexter was sitting at the island, wearing sweatpants and sipping coffee. He looked relaxed, his hair messy, the bandage on his shoulder stark white against his tan skin. Uncle Hermes was at the stove, wearing a kiss the cook apron. Where did he even find that? And flipping pancakes with his cane. Morning, sleepyhead, Hermes boomed. I hope you're hungry. I made my famous blueberry stack. The secret ingredient is bourbon. In the batter? Carly asked, leaning against the door frame. And in the cook, Hermes winked, taking a sip from a mug that definitely didn't contain coffee. Dexter turned on the stool. His eyes lit up when he saw her in his shirt. He reached out a hand, and she walked into his space naturally, letting him pull her between his knees. He pressed a kiss to her stomach, right through the fabric. "How is the head?" he asked softly. "Better," she smiled, running her fingers through his hair. "How is the shoulder?" "It exists," he shrugged. "Hermes is holding the kitchen hostage." "I am providing sustenance," Hermes corrected. He slid a plate of pancakes onto the counter. "Eat up. You two burned a lot of calories last night. You do realize there is currently no door on that bedroom, right?" "I heard everything." Carly's face turned bright red. Dexter choked on his coffee. "Hermes," Dexter warned, wiping his mouth. "What? I'm just saying. For a man who barely talks, you certainly have a vocabulary when you're..." "Pancakes!" Carly shouted, grabbing a fork to shove food into her mouth to stop the conversation. Rollie trotted into the kitchen, his nails clicking. He sat down next to Dexter's stool and let out a demanding woof. Without looking, Dexter cut a piece of sausage and dropped it. Rollie caught it midair. "You're spoiling him," Carly mumbled with a full mouth. "He is a war hero," Dexter said seriously. "He provided emotional support during the ambulance ride. He earns the sausage." Carly looked at the two of them, the powerful Alpha King feeding her pug, and her eccentric uncle day-drinking while cooking breakfast. Her chest swelled with warmth. This wasn't the lonely, sterile life she had feared. It was messy. It was loud. It was perfect. Chapter 24. Later that afternoon, Dexter led Carly down to the garage. She was hesitant. The last time she had been here, she had been fleeing, and she knew her beloved Carmen Gia was a total loss. "Dexter, I don't want to see it," she said, stopping by the elevator. "It's wrecked. I know it is." "Just come," he urged gently, taking her hand. They walked out into the private bay. The spot where the green car had been was empty. Carly felt a pang of sadness. "Did you have it towed to the scrapyard?" "No," Dexter said. He guided her around the corner to a separate, enclosed maintenance bay, a space usually reserved for his high-end fleet mechanics. There, sitting on a hydraulic lift, was the Carmen Gia. It looked terrible. The side panel was crushed in like a soda can, the glass was missing, and the bumper was hanging by a thread. But it was here. And standing next to it were 3 massive crates stamped with Volkswagen Classic Parts, Germany. "I had the parts flown in this morning," Dexter said, walking over to the car and running a hand over the dented fender. "New quarter panel, OEM glass, vintage bumper, and I found a specialist in Berlin who had the exact code for emerald green paint." Carly stared at him. "Dexter, the frame is bent. It's totaled." "The frame is steel," Dexter said stubbornly. "Steel can be straightened. I have the equipment." He picked up a wrench from a workbench. He wasn't wearing his suit. He was wearing coveralls that were already smeared with grease. "I didn't want to buy you a new car," he said, looking at her. "I know this car means independence. It's the first thing you built for yourself. So, we are not replacing it. We are fixing it." He held the wrench out to her. "We?" Carly asked, her voice trembling. "We," Dexter nodded. "I'm good at breaking things, Carly, but for you, I want to learn how to fix them." Carly looked at the wrench, then at the man who had bought her debt to save her nursery, and was now ready to spend his weekend rebuilding a 50-year-old engine just to preserve her pride. She took the wrench. A slow smile spread across her face. "Okay, Alpha," she said, rolling at the sleeves of his oversized shirt. "But if you strip a bolt, you're sleeping on the couch." Dexter grinned, a real boyish grin that made him look 10 years younger. "Understood. Now, hand me the torque wrench. We have work to do." They spent the rest of the day covered in grease, bickering over engine schematics, while Rollie slept on a pristine mechanics rag in the corner. It wasn't a grand gesture of wealth. It was a promise of partnership. And for Carly, that was worth more than all the gold in Port Valor. Chapter 25. 2 days later, the atmosphere in the penthouse boardroom was thick enough to choke a hog. The regional council had convened, an emergency session called by Councilman Thorne to address the irregularities surrounding the Alpha King's recent behavior. Dexter sat at the head of the obsidian table. He was wearing a fresh charcoal suit, but his left arm was in a sling to support his healing shoulder. His expression was stony, his ice blue eyes daring anyone to speak out of turn. "It is reckless, Alpha," Thorn droned, tapping a pen against a leather-bound folio. "Brawling on a public highway, transforming in full view of traffic. And for what? An unmated Omega who has brought nothing but chaos to the spire." Dexter's jaw tightened. A low growl vibrated in his chest. "She is not a chaotic element. She is a liability," Thorn interrupted. "We need stability, Dexter. We need a queen who understands the intricacies of our assets, not a gardener." The double doors at the end of the room swung open. Carly Johnson walked in. She wasn't wearing her gardening jeans or a ball gown. She was wearing a sharp, tailored navy blazer over a white blouse, and she was carrying a stack of files that looked heavy enough to crush a man's foot. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice cool and authoritative, "I apologize for the interruption. I was just reviewing the PAC's quarterly security expenditures." Dexter sat up straighter, blinking. "Carly?" "Sit down, Dexter," she said gently, patting his good shoulder as she passed him. She took the empty seat at the opposite end of the table and dropped the files. Thud. Thorn sneered. "This is a closed meeting, Ms. Johnson. We are discussing serious financial matters." "I know," Carly smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a shark smile. "That's why I'm here. I took the liberty of auditing the PAC's real estate holdings, with some generous assistance from Uncle Hermes' intelligence network, while recovering from my concussion. We noticed something interesting." She slid a paper across the table. "You're paying 20% above market rate for security contracts on the warehouse district properties," she stated, her tone professional. "Contracts held by a firm owned by your brother-in-law, Councilman Thorn." Thorn turned a shade of puce that clashed horribly with his tie. That is essential overhead." "It's embezzlement masked as overhead," Carly corrected. "I also noticed that the tax liability on the riverfront property, the one we discussed at dinner, hasn't been adjusted for the new wetland zoning. I filed the paperwork yesterday. I just saved the PAC $400,000 a year." The room went silent. The other councilmen looked from the paper to Thorn, then to Carly. Greed and respect warred in their eyes. $400,000? One of the elders asked, leaning forward. "Annually," Carly confirmed. "I also have a proposal to repurpose the empty lots in Sector 4 into community gardens. It writes off as a charitable donation, improves public relations, and increases the property value of the surrounding residential units by 12% within 2 years." She leaned back, crossing her legs. "So, Councilman Thorn, you were saying something about me being a liability?" Dexter watched her, his chest swelling with an emotion that was so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of him. She wasn't just defending herself. She was dominating them. She was speaking their language, money and power, and she was winning. Thorn sputtered, looking for an ally, but found none. The other wolves were too busy reading Carly's report. "Motion to adjourn," the elder councilman grunted. "We have new budget proposals to review." Carly stood up, winked at a stunned Dexter, and walked out of the room like she owned the building. Which, Dexter decided right then and there, she effectively did. Chapter 26. That evening, the terrace was bathed in the soft amber glow of the city lights. The garden Carly had planted was thriving, the scent of jasmine and wild honeysuckle mixing with the cool evening breeze. Dexter was pacing. He was usually a man of stillness, a predator who waited, but tonight he was vibrating with nervous energy. He kept checking his pocket, then checking his watch, then checking the position of the moon. "You're going to wear a groove in the slate," Carly said, stepping out through the glass doors. She was holding 2 mugs of tea. "Relax, big guy. The council is gone. You're safe." Dexter stopped. He looked at her. She was wearing one of his oversized sweaters and leggings, her hair messy and perfect. The bruise on her forehead had faded to a faint yellow smudge. She looked like home. "I'm not worried about the council," Dexter said, his voice rough. He took the tea from her and set it on a table without drinking it. "I am worried about protocol." "Protocol?" Carly raised an eyebrow. "Is this about the door again? Because I promised I wouldn't lock the new one." "No." Dexter took a step closer. He reached out, taking her hands in his. His palms were warm and slightly damp. "Carly, my life has been cold, structured, a series of transactions and battles." He looked down at her, his midnight blue eyes searching her face. "Then you walked into a hardware store and told me I was lifting wrong. You filled my house with plants. You filled my silence with jazz. You filled my chest with a heart I didn't know I had." Carly's breath hitched. She squeezed his hands. "Dexter, I don't want to just be your mate because biology says so," Dexter continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I want to be your partner, your mechanic, your husband." He let go of her hands and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't open it immediately. He dropped to one knee on the slate tiles. "Carly Johnson," he said, looking up at her with raw vulnerability. "Will you do me the extraordinary honor of letting me annoy you for the rest of our lives?" Carly stared at him. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring the city lights. She nodded, unable to speak. "Yes. Yes, you big idiot." Dexter smiled, a blinding, genuine smile that transformed his face. He opened the box. Inside sat a vintage platinum signet ring, heavy and timeless, set with a rare emerald that matched her car. He slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Yes!" Carly laughed, pulling him up to kiss him. "Woof!" They broke apart. Rollie trotted out from behind a fern, looking expectant. He had a red bow tie on, which was slightly crooked. "You're late," Dexter told the pug. "You were supposed to come out when I mealed." Rollie snorted, sat down on Dexter's foot, and looked at Carly as if to say, "I'm here now. Where's the treat?" Carly laughed, hugging Dexter tight, the ring cool against his neck. "He's perfect. You're perfect. Even if your timing is terrible." Chapter 27, 6 months later. The sign above the wrought iron gates read, "Greenhaven and Company, Landscape Architecture." The parking lot was full. Carly walked out of the main greenhouse, wiping dirt from her hands. Business had exploded since she took over the contract for the city's parks. A contract she won fairly, though being the Alpha Queen didn't hurt. She walked toward the reserved parking spot. Sitting there, gleaming under the afternoon sun, was the emerald green Volkswagen Carmen Ghia. It looked better than new. The bodywork was flawless, the paint deep and lustrous. The engine purred with a throaty, reliable rhythm as she turned the key. It was a testament to 3 months of weekends spent in the garage with Dexter, covered in grease, learning every bolt and valve. She drove home, the wind in her hair. Home was still the spire, but it had changed. The lobby now had massive planters filled with ferns. The staff smiled when they saw her. She took the private elevator up to the penthouse. When the doors opened, she was greeted by the smell of burnt cedar and roast chicken. "I'm home," she called out. Dexter appeared from the kitchen. He was wearing a suit, having just come from the office, but he had discarded the jacket. He looked healthy, happy, and relaxed. "Welcome back," he said, pulling her in for a kiss. "How is the nursery?" "Busy. Mrs. Higgins wants more hydrangeas. It's a crisis." Carly leaned back, looking past him toward the hallway leading to the master's suite. She grinned. The frame where the oak door had once been, and where the plywood had leaned, was gone. In its place stood a monstrosity of engineering. It was a solid steel door, reinforced with crossbars, looking like it belonged on a bank vault rather than a bedroom. It even had a spin-dial lock. "Do you like it?" Dexter asked, looking proud. "It's ballistic rated, and only the two of us have the combination." Carly laughed, shaking her head. "It's ridiculous. It's absolutely paranoid. I love it." "Good," Dexter said, nuzzling her neck, "because I intend to lock us in there for the weekend. Uncle Hermes is babysitting the dog." "Speaking of Hermes," Carly said, pulling back, "is he coming to the barbecue tonight?" Dexter's expression faltered. A look of mild terror crossed his face. "Yes, he said he is bringing a special guest." He sounded giddy. It was disturbing. Chapter 28. The barbecue on the terrace was a small, intimate affair. Just the pack's inner circle, a few close friends, and the family. Uncle Hermes was manning the grill, wearing his kiss the cook apron over a linen suit. He was flipping burgers with a flair that suggested he was conducting an orchestra. Rollie was sitting at his feet, staring at the falling grease with religious devotion. Dexter stood by the railing with Carly, holding a beer. He watched the sunset, feeling a sense of peace he had never thought possible. He had his mate. He had his pack. He had a steel bedroom door. Life was good. "So," Dexter said, nodding toward the elevator, "Hermes is late." "He likes to make an entrance," Carly said, leaning her head on his shoulder. Ding! The elevator doors slid open. "Greetings, mortals!" Hermes boomed, stepping out. He looked dapper, his silver hair gleaming. He turned back to the elevator, offering his arm to someone inside. "Come along, my dear. Don't be shy. The boy won't bite. Much." A woman stepped out. She was tall, elegant, and terrifying. She wore pearls, a tweed suit, and carried a handbag that looked like it contained the secrets of the universe. It was Margaret Pembroke, the Dowager Alpha, Dexter's mother. Dexter choked on his beer. He coughed violently, pointing a trembling finger at the pair. "Mother?" Dexter wheezed. Margaret smiled, a rare, shark-like expression that mirrored Hermes's perfectly. "Hello, Dexter. Hermes was just telling me about his jazz collection and his stamina." Hermes winked at Dexter. "She loves the saxophone, kid. Who knew?" Carly burst out laughing, clutching her stomach as she watched the blood drain from her husband's face. "Oh, my God," Carly gasped. "Uncle Hermes is dating your mom." Dexter looked at Hermes, who was grinning like a wolf who had just stolen the prime rib. He looked at his mother, who was actually blushing. Then he looked at Carly, who was laughing so hard she was crying. The Alpha King, the Breaker, the most feared wolf on the coast, closed his eyes and let out a long, suffering sigh. "I'm gonna need a stronger drink," Dexter muttered. "I'll get the bourbon!" Hermes shouted cheerfully from the grill. As the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the terrace in gold, Dexter looked at his chaotic, impossible family. He pulled Carly close, kissing the top of her head. "Nowhere to hide," she whispered, teasing him with his own line. Dexter smiled against her hair. Nowhere I'd rather be. The end. Quick favor, don't go anywhere yet. If you thought Carly was brave for locking the Alpha King out of the bedroom and making him sleep on a Persian rug, wait until you meet the heroine in this next story on your screen. You have to hear this next disaster unfold. Click the video on your screen right now. It is absolutely unhinged.